Hello, everybody. I hope you had a good New Year's and a good start of this year and everything. Imagine you're a helicopter pilot flying overhead and you come across a pack of dogs. Because they're like big dogs. But you just don't have regular wolves or something. All of a sudden they start on two legs. So this video here is about that today. So enjoy. Also, I got more videos about the fraud in Minnesota I'm going to cover as well. So enjoy.
Still moving north. Copy. Keep us 100 yards back. Don't spook them.
Roger that. Zooming in. They're staying tight. Leader up front.
Look at the size of that one. You getting this?
Yeah, it's all on tape.
Keep steady. Don't hit.
Flying search and rescue over the Cascade Mountains seemed routine until the camera mounted beneath the helicopter captured something running through the tree line. At first, the footage showed what looked like a lone hiker sprinting downhill, pursued by four massive figures moving on two legs with inhuman speed. Every instinct screamed to land and help. That decision led to the most terrifying hours of existence because the hiker running in terror was not human at all. So before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The morning started clear, which was rare for October in the Cascades. Weather reports predicted perfect visibility for at least 6 hours, enough time to complete the forestry survey and return to base before the afternoon clouds rolled in. The contract was straightforward: fly grid patterns over designated sections, record high-resolution video of forest density, and mark any signs of illegal logging or unusual activity. This was the kind of routine work that paid the bills between the more exciting search and rescue calls. The helicopter lifted off from the staging area at 7 in the morning, when the light was perfect for aerial photography, and the air was still cool and stable. Flight planning had designated 8 grid sections to cover, each one representing roughly 15 square miles of old-growth forest. The route would take the aircraft in a systematic pattern, ensuring complete coverage while maintaining fuel reserves for the return trip and any unexpected diversions. Previous flights over this area had been uneventful. The forests here were pristine, protected wilderness that saw few visitors beyond the occasional backpacker on marked trails. Wildlife was abundant, with elk herds visible from the air and black bears common enough that spotting them became routine. The camera had recorded countless hours of forest canopy, the footage eventually reviewed by forestry analysts looking for signs of disease, fire damage, or unauthorized logging operations. The helicopter was equipped with a stabilized camera system mounted on a gimbal beneath the fuselage, capable of recording in high definition while maintaining steady footage despite turbulence or movement. The system ran continuously during survey flights, storing hours of footage to external drives that the Forestry Service would review later. Most of the time, the recordings showed nothing but endless green canopy, the occasional dirt road, and wildlife too distant to identify clearly. 2 hours into the flight, while crossing a ridge that separated two deep valleys, movement on the monitor caught attention. The camera feed showed something moving fast through a clearing perhaps 800 feet below. At first glance, it appeared to be a person running downhill at full sprint, arms pumping, clearly in distress. The figure wore what looked like a red jacket, easily visible against the brown and green of the forest floor. Then the camera angle shifted slightly, and 4 more figures came into view. These were larger, much larger, running behind the first figure with a gait that seemed wrong even from that altitude. They moved on 2 legs, but with a loping stride that covered ground impossibly fast. Their bodies appeared massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur that caught the sunlight as they crashed through undergrowth. The way they moved was fluid yet unnatural, combining the power of a bear with the bipedal locomotion of a human, but achieving neither with true anatomical correctness. Zooming the camera in revealed more disturbing details. The pursuing figures had heads that combined canine and humanoid features, with elongated snouts filled with visible teeth even at this distance. Their arms were too long for human proportions, ending in hands that showed both fingers and what appeared to be substantial claws. When they bounded over obstacles, they used both 2-legged and 4-legged gaits interchangeably, switching between modes of locomotion with ease that suggested either form was natural to them. The rational mind tried to process what the camera was recording, Perhaps they were bears, but bears do not run consistently upright. Perhaps they were people in costumes, but no person could move that fast through such rough terrain. The figures moved with coordination, spreading out slightly to flank the running hiker, cutting off escape routes with tactical precision that suggested intelligence and intent. Training for search and rescue situations was extensive, covering everything from medical emergencies to hostile wildlife encounters. The protocol was clear in cases where someone appeared to be in immediate danger: assess the situation, call for backup if necessary, and provide assistance if safe to do so. Radio contact went out immediately, reporting a possible attack in progress, requesting emergency support, and providing GPS coordinates. The dispatcher responded with standard questions about the nature of the threat, number of individuals involved, and whether weapons were visible. Explaining that 4 massive figures were chasing a hiker through the woods sounded absurd even while saying it. The dispatcher asked for clarification, suggested the figures might be bears, and advised maintaining altitude until ground units could respond. Ground units were at least 40 minutes away. On the monitor, the hiker stumbled and fell, rolling down a steep embankment before scrambling back to their feet. The 4 pursuing figures did not slow. They moved with terrible purpose, closing the distance with each stride. The lead dogman was perhaps 30 yards behind now, its massive frame clearly visible as it bounded over fallen logs and tore through brush that would stop a human cold. The decision came from somewhere beyond rational thought. That hiker was going to die in the next 60 seconds unless something changed. The helicopter banked hard, dropping altitude rapidly while scanning for a clearing large enough to set down. A narrow meadow appeared ahead, roughly 200 yards from where the chase was happening. It was small, barely adequate, surrounded by tall pines, but it would have to work. The descent was faster than regulation allowed, dropping through air pockets that made the aircraft shudder and the altitude indicators spin. Training screamed that this was reckless, that landing in unfamiliar terrain without proper reconnaissance was dangerous, that the rotor clearance between those trees was marginal at best. None of that mattered. Someone was dying down there, and this helicopter represented their only chance. The skids touched down hard in the meadow grass, the impact jarring enough to rattle equipment and trigger warning lights on the instrument panel. Engine power reduced to idle but not cut entirely, keeping the rotors spinning in case immediate liftoff became necessary. The survival kit came out of its compartment automatically, hands moving through practiced motions while eyes scanned the tree line for movement. The forest was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a calm autumn day, but the wrong kind of quiet, where even insects stopped making noise. Birds that should have been calling were silent. The wind moved through the pines without the usual rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. It was the silence that comes when predators are near, when every living thing freezes and hopes not to be noticed. Shouting seemed like the right approach, calling out to let the hiker know help had arrived, making noise to potentially scare off whatever was pursuing them. The voice echoed across the meadow and into the trees, sounding small and inadequate in that vast wilderness. No response came back, just that terrible, pressing silence. Movement at the edge of the clearing. The hiker emerged from between 2 large pines, stumbling into the open with arms waving. The red jacket was torn, and there appeared to be scratches visible on exposed skin. The figure was perhaps 60 yards away, moving with the exhausted gait of someone who had been running for their life and had nothing left. Every instinct said to run toward them, to close the distance and get them into the helicopter as quickly as possible. But something held that impulse in check. Something about the way the hiker moved seemed off. The gait was too smooth for someone who had just been sprinting through rough terrain. The arms swung in a way that looked almost mechanical, rehearsed rather than natural. The hiker got closer. 40 yards now, 30, close enough to see details. The face was wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the eyes set too far apart, the mouth too wide. The hands hanging at the ends of those swinging arms had fingers that were too long, with nails that looked more like claws barely concealed beneath torn gloves. Realization hit like ice water. This was not a hiker. This had never been a hiker. The thing approaching wore human clothing and moved on 2 legs, but the illusion was imperfect up close. The skin visible beneath the torn jacket was covered in fine, dark hair. The movements were too fluid, too powerful. This was a dogman, and it had been leading the way to lure rescue down from the sky. The creature must have seen the recognition dawn, must have noticed the backward step and the hand moving toward the survival knife. Its face changed. The attempt at human expression melted away, replaced by something ancient and predatory. The mouth opened wider than any human mouth could, revealing rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh. A sound came out, not quite a howl and not quite a scream, but something that carried across the meadow with terrible clarity. The response came from the forest. 4 more howls answered from different directions, surrounding the meadow. The pack had been waiting. This had been coordinated. The fake hiker had drawn the helicopter down while the others moved into position. Now the trap was sprung, and the only route to safety was the aircraft 20 yards behind. The sprint back to the helicopter happened in a blur of panic and adrenaline. The dogman that had been posing as a hiker dropped the pretense entirely, falling forward onto all 4s and charging with terrifying speed. Behind, the sound of the pack crashing through the undergrowth as they emerged from the tree line grew louder with each second. Hands grabbed the door handle. The pack leader was less than 10 yards away now, closing fast. The door yanked open. Inside, slam it shut. The dogman hit the side of the helicopter a split second later, with enough force to rock the entire aircraft on its skids. The metal screamed as claws raked across it, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced panels. The collective pulled up hard. The turbine screamed as throttle went to maximum. The helicopter lifted off the ground in a nose-high attitude that set off stall warnings and pushed the aircraft to its performance limits. Below, the pack leader leaped, its massive jaws snapping at the skids as they rose just out of reach. The creature fell back to earth, landing on all 4s with shocking grace before immediately preparing for another jump. Altitude climbed. 100 feet. 200. The pack was visible below now. 5 dogmen standing in a rough circle around where the helicopter had been. They were massive, easily 7 to 8 feet tall even in their hunched posture. Dark brown and black fur covered their bodies, and their heads combined features of wolves and something more human, creating a visage that violated every natural law. At 300 feet, far enough that they could not reach even with their incredible jumping ability, the helicopter leveled off and began to turn. The camera system was still recording everything. The footage would be proof, undeniable evidence that these creatures existed. The Forestry Service would have to acknowledge what was living in these mountains. Then one of the dogmen did something unexpected. It looked directly up at the helicopter, making eye contact through the windscreen despite the distance. The intelligence in those eyes was unmistakable. This was not an animal operating on instinct. This was a thinking being, and it understood exactly what the camera meant. The creature reached down and picked up a rock the size of a basketball. The throw was casual, almost lazy, but the rock covered the 300 feet of altitude in less than 2 seconds. It struck the camera pod mounted beneath the helicopter with a crack that echoed through the airframe. The video feed went to static, then black. A second rock followed, then a third. The pack worked together, selecting and throwing stones with accuracy that should have been impossible. Several hit the fuselage, denting metal and cracking plastic fairings. One struck the tail rotor assembly with a sound like a gunshot, and suddenly the helicopter yawed hard to the right as the tail rotor efficiency dropped by half. Fighting for control became the only priority. The damaged tail rotor was still functioning, but barely, providing perhaps 60% of normal thrust. Compensating required constant pedal input and careful collective management to prevent the helicopter from spinning. The engine temperature climbed as the turbine worked harder to maintain altitude with the increased drag from battle damage. Below, the pack watched. They did not chase. They simply stood there, 5 massive figures in the meadow, tracking the wounded helicopter as it limped away toward the ridge. They knew they had inflicted damage. They knew the aircraft was vulnerable now. and they knew these mountains better than any human ever could. The original plan had been to return to base, to get out of this nightmare and back to civilization, where the police and wildlife authorities could be notified. That plan died as the helicopter struggled to maintain altitude. With the tail rotor damage, the aircraft could not sustain the climb rate needed to clear the ridge ahead. The gauges told a story of systems operating at their margins, of metal and mechanics being pushed beyond safe limits. A new meadow appeared off to the left, larger than the first one, situated in a small valley that offered some protection from wind. Landing there was not optimal, but continuing to fly with degrading aircraft performance was suicide. The auto-rotation procedure ran through trained reflexes as the helicopter descended, managing the collective and throttle to trade altitude for a controlled descent rate. The landing was rougher than the first one. The damaged tail rotor made directional control difficult, causing the helicopter to weather vane as the skids touched down. Metal groaned and something in the tail boom made a concerning snap, but the aircraft settled onto the grass without rolling over. The engine shut down immediately to prevent further damage from the compromised tail rotor system. Silence fell as the rotors spun down, that same wrong silence from before. The radio came out of its mount immediately, but static was the only response to emergency calls. The mountains blocked signal to the repeater towers, and without altitude, there was no way to reach anyone. The emergency locator beacon activated automatically when the master switch was cut, but rescue would take hours to arrive even in perfect conditions. The survival kit contained the standard equipment required by regulation. 3 days of emergency rations, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, a signal mirror, waterproof matches, emergency blanket, and a flare gun with 6 rounds. There was also a hatchet and a fixed blade knife, tools meant for clearing brush or emergency egress, now potentially weapons against creatures that could tear a person apart with their bare hands. Staying with the helicopter was standard survival protocol. Aircraft were easier to spot from the air than a person wandering through the forest. The helicopter also provided some shelter and contained supplies, but standard survival protocol did not account for intelligent predators that had just watched the aircraft crash land and knew exactly where it was. The decision to leave came from the same instinctive place that had recognized the fake hiker. This meadow was a trap waiting to close. The dogmen knew the helicopter was crippled. They would come, perhaps not immediately, but they would come. Staying meant being cornered. Moving meant at least having options, however limited. The survival kit went into a backpack along with the handheld radio and the last bottle of water. The flare gun went into a pocket where it could be reached quickly, the knife strapped to the belt on the left side, the hatchet on the right. Everything else stayed with the helicopter, marking the spot where rescue teams would eventually search. The forest beyond the meadow was old growth, massive pines and firs that blocked most of the sunlight and created a cathedral of shadows beneath their canopy. The undergrowth was sparse in the deep shade, which made movement easier, but also meant there was less cover. Deer trails wound through the trees, offering paths of least resistance that animals had used for generations. Following the trails seemed wise at first. They headed generally eastward, toward where the ridge dropped down to lower elevations, and eventually to logging roads that connected to civilization. The pack had been northwest of the landing site, which meant putting distance between their last known position and current movement was the priority. An hour of steady hiking brought exhaustion that fear had been holding at bay. Adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the shakes and nausea that came after extreme stress. The body wanted to stop, to rest, to process what had happened. The mind knew that stopping meant dying. The dogmen were out there, and they were certainly following. Every sound in the forest seemed amplified, every rustle of leaves potentially marking the approach of those massive predators. The forest itself seemed different now, transformed from a neutral wilderness into hostile territory. Trees that had seemed majestic from the air now felt claustrophobic, their trunks blocking sight lines and creating countless hiding places. The undergrowth that had appeared sparse from above was thick enough in places to conceal creatures that stood 8 feet tall. Every shadow could be harboring a dogman, every gap between trees a potential ambush point. The survival training kicked in automatically, assessing resources and options with mechanical efficiency. The backpack contained perhaps 2 days of food if rationed carefully. Water was available from the streams, though drinking untreated water risked illness that would be catastrophic in this situation. The first aid kit held basic supplies, nothing that would help against the kind of injuries the dogmen could inflict. The real weapons were the knife and hatchet, tools that felt absurdly inadequate but were better than nothing. The first sign of pursuit came as the trail crossed a small stream. Tracks in the mud on the far bank were fresh, massive impressions that combined canine paw pads with something more like fingers. The prints were easily 12 inches long and showed claw marks that had dug deep into the soft earth. They were recent, made within the last few minutes based on how water was still seeping into the depressions. The tracks headed in the same direction as the trail. The dogmen were ahead now, not behind. They had circled around, moving through the forest with speed and knowledge of the terrain that turned their pursuit into a hunt. This was their territory. They knew every ridge, every valley, every game trail. They were not chasing. They were herding. The realization brought a new level of fear. The understanding that this was not random predation but calculated hunting behavior that demonstrated clear intelligence. Wolves used similar tactics when hunting elk, working together to drive their prey toward predetermined kill zones or exhaustion. But wolves were animals operating on instinct, honed by millions of years of evolution. These creatures showed something different, something that approached human-level planning and coordination. They were not just reacting to their prey's movements but anticipating them, cutting off routes of escape before those routes were even attempted. The ability of one dogman to mimic human form and behavior was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire nightmare. That level of shape-shifting suggested abilities that defied biological explanation. How could bones reshape themselves so completely? How could fur disappear beneath apparently normal human skin? The fake hiker had been convincing enough to fool trained eyes from the air, and only close proximity had revealed the deception. Changing direction seemed necessary, even though it meant leaving the easy path of the deer trail for the difficult terrain of the forested slope. The climb was steep, forcing hands to grab at tree trunks and exposed roots for balance. Progress slowed to a crawl. Every 20 yards of elevation gained required tremendous effort and made noise that carried through the quiet forest. A rock outcropping appeared ahead, jutting from the hillside and creating a small overhang. It offered a defensive position, a place where at least one direction was protected by stone. The climb up to it was exhausting, but the vantage point let vision sweep across the forest below, searching for movement among the trees. They were there. 3 dogmen visible through gaps in the trees, moving parallel to each other in a loose line that swept through the forest below. They moved on all fours when speed was needed, dropping into a loping gait that covered ground with terrifying efficiency. When they paused to investigate something, they rose onto 2 legs, standing fully upright as they scanned their surroundings with obvious intelligence. The 4th and 5th members of the pack were not visible, which was somehow worse than seeing them. They were out there, positioned somewhere to complete the encirclement. This was coordinated hunting behavior, the kind of tactical approach that wolves used when taking down large prey, except these were not wolves, and they were hunting something that could think and plan and use tools. The flare gun came out of the pocket almost unconsciously. 6 shots, 6 chances to either signal rescue or potentially drive off the pack with fire. But rescue was still hours away at minimum, and wasting flares on a gamble seemed foolish. The gun went back into the pocket. The knife came out instead, gripped tight even though it felt absurdly inadequate against creatures that could tear through helicopter metal. Below, the 3 visible dogmen had stopped. They stood motionless among the trees, heads raised, clearly scenting the air. One turned and looked directly at the outcropping. Even though there was no line of sight through the dense forest, it could smell fear. Or perhaps it could hear the hammering heartbeat even from 100 yards away. The creature made a sound, a series of short barks that carried a clear tone of communication. The response came from uphill. 2 more barks, closer than seemed possible. The 4th and 5th pack members had flanked even further than expected. They were above the outcropping now, cutting off retreat in that direction. The net was closing. In minutes, maybe seconds, they would converge on this position from multiple directions. Moving again was not a choice, but a necessity. The outcropping was a dead end, a place to make a last stand rather than a shelter. The only direction left was laterally along the slope, following the contour of the hillside and hoping to find some gap in their formation. The rocks provided cover for the first few yards. Then it was back into open forest, exposed and vulnerable. A fallen tree appeared ahead, a massive old-growth fir that had come down during some past storm. The trunk was perhaps 6 feet in diameter, creating a natural barrier and offering concealment behind its bulk. The scramble over it was clumsy, made worse by shaking hands and the weight of the pack, but the other side offered a moment of respite from being visible. Breathing came in ragged gasps. The altitude was getting harder to ignore, the thin mountain air not carrying enough oxygen for panicked flight. Every muscle burned. The rational mind knew that humans could not outrun dogmen, could not outfight them, could only hope to outlast them or find some refuge they could not breach. Options were narrowing with each passing minute. I heard a sound from the left. Not a bark or howl, but the snap of a branch under tremendous weight. One of them was close, moving through the forest in the same direction. The footfalls were distinct now, heavy impacts that shook the ground slightly with each step. The creature was not trying to be quiet. It knew where its prey was and felt no need for stealth. The dogman emerged from behind a cluster of young pines 30 yards away. It was enormous, larger than the others, with fur so dark it was almost black. Scars crisscrossed its shoulders and chest, old wounds from fights that had healed into thick ridges. This was the pack leader, the one that had hit the helicopter, and it moved with the confidence of an apex predator that had never known fear. Eye contact happened before there was time to look away. The creature's eyes were not the yellow of a wolf or the brown of a bear. They were something closer to human, with an intelligence that was deeply disturbing. Those eyes assessed, calculated, recognized the fear, and understood it. A low sound rumbled from its chest, not quite a growl, more like satisfaction at finding what it had been tracking. The flare gun came up without conscious thought. The dogman saw the movement and paused, head cocking slightly to the side as if curious about this small object being pointed in its direction. The trigger pulled. The flare launched with a pop and a flash of burning magnesium, covering the 30 yards in less than a second before striking the creature square in the chest. The dogman recoiled, more from surprise than pain. The flare bounced off its thick fur and fell to the forest floor, burning bright red and filling the area with acrid smoke. The creature backed away from the flames, clearly uncomfortable with the fire but not panicked. It circled to the side, keeping distance from the burning flare while maintaining focus on its target. The moment of hesitation was enough. Running seemed impossible. Fighting seemed suicidal. But a third option appeared in the form of a steep ravine just visible through the trees ahead. The drop looked significant, maybe 20 feet to a stream bed below, but the sides were steep enough that the dogman would have difficulty following quickly. The sprint to the ravine edge took perhaps 5 seconds. Behind, the dogman leader roared, a sound that combined rage and challenge. Other howls answered from multiple directions. The pack was converging, alerted by their leader's call. The edge of the ravine appeared, and there was no time to assess the drop properly, no time to plan a safe descent. The jump happened. For a moment there was nothing but air and the sick sensation of falling, then impact, hard and painful, rolling down a slope of loose rock and dirt. The world spun. Something hit the shoulder hard enough to cause immediate numbness. More impacts as the tumble continued. unable to stop or control the descent. Finally, momentum died in the rocky stream bed at the bottom, lying face down in ice-cold water that was perhaps 6 inches deep. Everything hurt. The shoulder screamed with pain when movement was attempted. The ankle had twisted during the fall and was already swelling. Multiple cuts and scrapes burned where skin had been torn on rocks. But nothing was broken, at least nothing that prevented movement. That was the only thing that mattered. Above, at the ravine edge, 3 dogmen appeared. They looked down at the stream bed, assessing the drop and the steep sides. One started to climb down, finding handholds in the crumbling earth. But the loose soil gave way and it slid several feet before catching itself. The creature snarled in frustration and pulled itself back up to the top. They were not giving up. 2 of them disappeared from view, clearly moving to find an easier way down. The 3rd remained at the edge, watching, tracking every movement below. Its presence was a reminder that even a temporary obstacle would not stop them for long. The pack had time, patience, and knowledge of this terrain that would eventually lead them to a crossing point. The stream became the path forward. Following it downstream meant moving away from where the pack was concentrated, and the rocky bed provided somewhat easier travel than the forested slopes. The water was numbingly cold, but that cold helped dull some of the pain from the injuries. Each step required focus to avoid slipping on wet stones or stepping into deeper pools. A sound behind. Splashing. One of the dogmen had found a way down and was in the stream now, following the same route. The distance was maybe 200 yards, but that gap would close quickly. The creature moved with purpose, bounding from rock to rock with balance that seemed impossible for something so large. Ahead, the stream dropped over a small waterfall into a pool perhaps 10 feet below. The area around the pool was more open, with less tree coverage, which meant more visibility, but also more exposure. Options were limited. Stay in the ravine with the dogman closing fast, or take the waterfall drop and hope the landing was survivable with already injured limbs. The choice made itself. The edge of the waterfall approached and the jump happened almost before there was time to think about it. The drop felt longer than 10 feet. The pool came up fast. Impact with the water was shocking, the cold driving the air from lungs already burning from exertion. Disorientation lasted several seconds before up and down made sense again. The backpack wanted to drag down, its weight suddenly treacherous in the water. Hands fumbled with the straps, nearly losing the pack entirely before getting a solid grip and swimming toward what looked like the nearest bank. The pool was deeper than expected, perhaps 8 feet in the center where the waterfall had carved out a basin over decades of erosion. The rocks at the bottom were slick with algae, making footing treacherous even when depth allowed standing. The current from the waterfall created a circular flow that wanted to pull back toward the falling water, requiring active swimming to escape its influence. The injured shoulder screamed with pain at every stroke, the cold water doing nothing to numb the grinding sensation of damaged tissue. Breaking the surface brought gasping breaths and immediate searching for the nearest bank. The pool was not deep, perhaps chest high in the middle, and the scramble to shore was clumsy but successful. Turning back showed the dogman at the top of the waterfall, looking down with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. It did not jump. Instead, it threw back its head and howled, a long wavering cry that echoed through the ravine. The answering howls came from at least 4 different directions. The pack was repositioning, using their superior knowledge of the terrain to coordinate another encirclement. This game of pursuit had been going on for hours now, and they showed no signs of tiring or giving up. If anything, they seemed to be enjoying the hunt, drawing it out rather than ending it quickly. Beyond the pool, the ravine opened into a broader valley where the stream joined a larger creek. The forest here was less dense, with more sunlight reaching the ground and creating patches of undergrowth that offered concealment. A fallen tree spanning the creek created a natural bridge, and beyond it, the terrain rose toward another ridge. The crossing happened with painful slowness, each step on the log requiring concentration to maintain balance with injured ankle and numb shoulder. The pack was moving, their howls growing closer. Time was measured in minutes now, maybe seconds. The far side of the log offered no immediate shelter, just more forest and the exhausting prospect of another climb. Then, through a gap in the trees ahead, something unexpected appeared. A structure, man-made. It looked like an old fire lookout tower, the kind the Forest Service built decades ago before satellite monitoring made them obsolete. The tower was perhaps a quarter-mile away, wooden frame rising above the canopy, and it represented the first real shelter since this nightmare began. The climb toward the tower pushed abused muscles past their limits. Every step uphill felt like moving through mud. The ankle threatened to give out with each impact. The shoulder was useless now, the arm hanging mostly limp. But the tower grew closer, resolving into more detail with each painful yard gained. The structure looked old but intact, with a wooden staircase wrapping around its frame up to an enclosed cabin at the top. Paint had long since peeled away, leaving gray, weathered wood that had survived decades of mountain weather. The tower had probably been built in the 1930s or 40s, back when fire detection relied on human observers stationed in high places during the dry season. Modern satellite systems and aircraft patrols had made these towers obsolete, and most had been abandoned to the elements. This one looked like it had not seen human visitors in years, maybe decades, but the basic structure appeared sound, the heavy timbers of its frame still solid despite their age. A glance back showed the dogmen were closing fast. They had abandoned any pretense of stealth or tactics. This was the final push, the moment when the pack would overwhelm their exhausted prey. The lead dogman was perhaps 100 yards away now, bounding through the forest with horrifying speed. The others fanned out to either side, creating a wide net that would prevent any last-minute escape attempt. Behind, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The dogmen were no longer bothering with stealth or coordination. They were closing in for the kill, confident that their prey was exhausted and injured and had nowhere left to run. The sounds they made were almost eager, short barks and yips that sounded disturbingly like laughter. The base of the tower was surrounded by tall grass and old debris. The stairs looked rickety, with several treads missing or rotted through, but they were still there. The climb began, testing each step before committing weight to it. Behind, the first dogman burst from the tree line, the pack leader with its scarred chest and intelligent eyes. It saw the tower and the figure climbing it, and it charged. The climb became desperate, skipping treads that looked weak, grabbing the railing with the one good hand and hauling upward. The dogman reached the base of the tower. The structure shook as the creature slammed into the wooden supports, testing them. A deep growl rumbled from below, and then the sound of claws on wood as it began to climb. The cabin at the top appeared above. 20 more steps. 15. The door was visible now, hanging partially open on rusted hinges. 10 steps. The dogman was climbing faster, its weight causing the entire tower to sway. 5 steps. Hands reached the platform and pulled. The cabin door was right there. Inside, the door slammed shut. There was no lock, but a heavy wooden beam lay nearby, clearly designed to bar the door from inside. The beam lifted with the one good arm and crashed into its brackets, securing the door just as tremendous weight hit it from outside. The wood groaned but held. Claws scraped against it, searching for purchase. The cabin was small, perhaps 10 feet square, with windows on all 4 sides that had been fitted with heavy wooden shutters. The shutters were closed but not latched. Outside, the dogman was circling the platform, testing each window, pushing at shutters. Its massive silhouette was visible through gaps in the aged wood. The interior of the cabin held the remnants of its former purpose. A desk bolted to the floor, shelves that had once held equipment, a chair lying on its side in one corner. Everything was covered in thick dust and the debris of years of abandonment. The dogman's investigation of the cabin was methodical and intelligent. It checked each window systematically, applying pressure at different points to test for weakness. When the shutters held, it moved to the door, slamming against it with calculated force. The wooden bar held, but the entire doorframe groaned under the impact. Splinters appeared around the hinges. Another hit like that and the door would fail. Through gaps in the shutters, the other pack members were visible climbing the tower. The structure swayed with each addition of weight. These lookout towers had been built strong, designed to withstand fierce mountain winds and heavy snow loads. But they were never meant to support 5 creatures that combined weighed over a ton. Support beams that had stood for 80 years were being pushed beyond their engineered limits. Other shapes appeared, climbing the tower. The whole pack was coming up now, and the structure groaned under their combined weight. The tower had been built to hold 2 people at most, not 5 creatures that each weighed several hundred pounds. Somewhere below, a support beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The pack leader's face appeared at one window, pressing against the shutters, trying to force them open. Its breath came in heavy snorts that stirred decades of accumulated dust inside the cabin. Those intelligent eyes found the figure inside and held contact. There was recognition there, and something else. Anticipation. The creature knew its prey was trapped. The tower lurched. Another support had failed. The whole structure was tilting now, leaning at an angle that sent old equipment sliding across the cabin floor. The dogmen noticed the movement and began to climb down, their survival instincts warning them that the tower was about to collapse. All except the pack leader. It remained on the platform, unwilling to give up when victory was so close. A tremendous crack echoed from below. The tower tilted further. Inside the cabin, hands grabbed at anything solid as the floor became a slope. The pack leader finally abandoned its position, dropping to the platform and then bounding down the stairs with impossible agility. The tower continued its slow collapse, falling in a long arc that seemed to take forever. Impact. The cabin hit the ground on its side with tremendous force. Wood splintered, windows shattered. The world tumbled again, rolling once before coming to rest upside down against a cluster of trees. Pain was everywhere, old injuries joined by new ones. But consciousness held, and with it the awareness that the cabin was breached, the door torn partially from its hinges. Outside, the dogmen were recovering from the tower's collapse. They circled the wreckage, approaching cautiously now that their prey might be injured or dead. The pack leader reached the breach first, its massive head pushing through the opening, snout questing as it searched the interior. Those eyes found their target, and the creature began to force its way inside. The flare gun was still in the pocket. 3 rounds left. Hands that shook from exhaustion and fear pulled the weapon free, aimed at the dogman's face barely 3 feet away, and fired. The flare struck the creature directly in the eye at point-blank range. The dogman recoiled with a howl of pain, thrashing backwards and clawing at its face. The pack leader's howls changed pitch, becoming sounds of genuine agony. The other dogmen responded with alarm calls of their own, clustering around their injured leader. The opening this created was small, measured in seconds, but it was enough. The crawl from the wrecked cabin happened on instinct, moving through the breach while the pack was distracted. Running was impossible. The injured ankle would not support running, but movement was possible, a limping scramble away from the wreckage and into the forest. Behind, the pack leader was still howling, and the others were torn between pursuing and protecting their injured alpha. The sound of a helicopter in the distance gave the first hope in hours. Rescue was coming. All that remained was staying